When my twin sister and I were very little, we were taking a bath together. A spider came crawling by. One of us made a fist and smashed the spider flat. The other one of us said, "Sister, why did you kill that spider? That was a good spider." The other one said, "Sister, that's a dead spider." And I don't remember this. My mother told me about it, along with other stories of our childhood. Mary probably told stories like that to Jesus and to his siblings. No doubt, as a fond mother, she told even more of them to other people. Now, a few weeks ago, I mentioned a belief that Luke must have sat with Mary in her old age and heard these kinds of stories, stories of his birth, stories of his growing up. Many people have told me that one of the hard things about getting older is being the only one left who remembers certain things. Now, I can imagine Mary sitting with Luke and saying, "I must be the only one still alive who remembers the night he was born. No one shares that memory with me." The same would have been true of many of her memories, and even if the younger children vaguely recalled certain things, she still had no contemporaries who went through them with her. Mary could have shared dozens of memories, for all we know, with Luke, funny things Jesus said or did, or perhaps about his favorite foods or flowers or a pet he had loved, or what games he enjoyed. But of all the stories Mary might have told, Luke only recounted a few. In other sources, there are some rather fantastic tales told about his childhood, ranging from charming to somewhat unpleasant, but scholars generally discount these stories as inventions of imaginative minds. Now, as I mentioned some weeks ago, there were theological reasons Luke talked about the birth of Jesus. He wanted to affirm his genuine humanity. And as for the story of visiting Jerusalem with 12-year-old Jesus, that could have been part of the same reason. I've never been entirely sure of its purpose. After all, Luke didn't leave us a commentary, but I do love to speculate. The story recounts him as a precocious adolescent whose religious thinkers admired before he got controversial. Sprinkled throughout his ministry are stories about the same thing, however, religious leaders who approved of him or of his teachings, albeit some of them did it secretly. None of the other gospel writers speak about Jesus' childhood. Matthew told grand tales of his birth, but skipped to adulthood. Mark and John don't even tell of his birth. Yet Luke told this story. I wonder if he couldn't resist including at least one about Jesus growing up. And it does tell us a few things. And one is the simple reminder that Jesus was a relatively normal child. The Bible uses the phrase that he grew in stature and in favor with God and humanity. In other words, he grew up. He grew up like a normal kid. But he didn't grow up to be a brat or a juvenile delinquent. He grew up, he was likable. As Luke's stories demonstrate, he had a good family structure. And we know he was taught carpentry by Joseph. He most likely learned something about reading and writing. We don't know how much, and scholars speculate upon how literate he was. But we do know the Israelite boys tended to be taught this more than children of any other culture at the time. Jesus' family was clearly regular in synagogue life. It was his habit to attend synagogue, and no one was surprised when he showed up. His family was devout. We know this partly because most people hoped to spend at least one Passover during their lifetimes in Jerusalem, but Mary and Joseph went every year. It was a significant allocation of time and resources. This was a loving family. This story illustrates their love. By the way, has it ever occurred to you how this story is reminiscent of the Christmas movie Home Alone, where the family miscounts and somehow boards an airplane without one of their kids? Well, Jesus was older than 8-year-old Kevin in Home Alone. He was 12, and the parents, Mary and Joseph, were not being neglectful. Mary and Joseph obviously allowed him a significant amount of autonomy, which is not unusual for a boy of that age. They were likely keeping track of younger children, and they trusted Jesus to stick with a group. I also had to have been a large enough group to discourage highway bandits from attacking. We're told they had family and friends in the group. But after a day's journey, they compared notes and realized they hadn't seen Jesus all day long, and they checked and realized he simply wasn't there. We don't know the functional details of what they did at that moment. It would have been hard to rush back to Jerusalem with little kids in tow, so if they had them, they might have put them in the care of their family members. Imagine how fast they had to think about such things while they're frantically worrying about what had happened to Jesus. They head back to Jerusalem. They're heedless of the danger of traveling alone. We don't hear that they griped about the expense of adding time to their journey. It seems possible to me that they first went to Bethany to see if he was there. Bethany was on the southeastern slope of the Mount of Olives, about 2 miles from Jerusalem. Visitors sometimes stayed there and in other villages because Jerusalem just couldn't accommodate everyone who came on the high holy days. In fact, it's been speculated that the family of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, who were from Bethany, might have become acquainted with Mary and Joseph's family during those annual visits to Jerusalem. And so it's possible Jesus' family even stayed with them every year. The idea was they got acquainted and they said, hey, why don't you stay with us when you come back to Jerusalem? This would mean that Jesus and his siblings could have played with Mary and Martha and Lazarus' kids. And on this occasion, Joseph and Mary might have wondered if maybe he'd wandered off with them and gotten into some kind of mischief or something. Anyway, if they had spent the night in Bethany before leaving for Nazareth, it seems logical they would go there first to see if Martha's family had heard anything about him. Afterwards, they rushed to Jerusalem. They hunt the city for 3 whole days and finally find Jesus sitting with the leaders, the teachers at the temple. Now, I think it's interesting that it took 3 days for Joseph and Mary to locate Jesus. If he was spending all of his time at the temple, you'd think, wouldn't that be easy to find him? Which makes me wonder if they didn't even think of the temple as a possible place to search. And that would mean they hadn't noticed anything in particular up to that point that led them to believe he would be at the temple. In other words, he had appeared, again, to be a rather normal boy of 12. This could disturb those who want to see him sort of, born with a halo and always aware of it. But the early followers of Jesus would be troubled by that attitude, assuming that he didn't need to grow up like a normal kid. I don't know. I only know that it means a great deal to me that he was also human, and therefore his death was a genuine sacrifice. And could the trip to Jerusalem as a 12-year-old have marked something of a turning point when he became more aware of himself and of spiritual matters? We have no way of knowing this for sure about Jesus, but for other humans, we know there often is a point, and we suddenly have a door open in our hearts. We become aware of wider realities. We become aware of different possibilities. We stumble onto the truth there's something more to life than eating and sleeping and enjoying ourselves. We catch a glimpse of God. Now, for Mary and Joseph, it registered that the teachers were impressed with their boy. Mary remembered it. She pondered over it. At the same time, they were normal parents. They didn't care at that moment about angel songs or the visit of magi or of shepherds or anything of that sort. All they can think of is, why did you do this? They're worried and they're scared. It must have seemed as if Jesus was old enough to have known better. We take his answer as wise and knowing. Didn't you know I needed to be in my Father's house? Of course, it's possible to hear those words also, like a preteen making an excuse, trying to get himself out of trouble. Maybe a mixture of wisdom and so on. But if it was his first major awareness of himself and of his calling, he may have stared at them in wonder. He had crossed a threshold. The world now looked different. It had taken on new meaning. Whatever it was, Jesus went home with Mary and Joseph. We're told he was obedient to them. We know he continued to grow in stature and in spirit, and what he became 18 years later would start changing this world and changing it for the better. Religious thinkers are often concerned about the secularization of Christmas. They say, we lose the baby in the manger. And that's true, we do. But one writer I looked at was concerned as much by the idea that we might leave Jesus in the manger, that we might sing songs and speak nostalgically and sentimentally of his birth, but that we would never allow him to grow up and make a difference in our lives and in the lives of the world. It is easy to treasure the story of a child's birth with angel songs and stars overhead. It is considerably more difficult to hear the child grown into a man telling us to forgive the people who hurt or annoy us and to love even those who persecute us. When the angels sang of peace on earth, we'd like to think of that as a gift that comes floating down like a sparkling cloud of safety and happiness. The adult Jesus would call us to pick up our crosses and to become makers of peace, justice, and goodwill. The work of Christmas is begun. Amen.